Hello, my name is Mustafa. Welcome to Lab101. We're continuing with the third video of the statistics. What is an independent, dependent, extraneous, and control variables? So let's see what are those. An independent variable is changed by the experimenter, and dependent variable changes according to the independent variable. So experimenter cannot change the dependent variable directly. They have to change the independent variable, and then they get to change the dependent variable. This is hard to explain. Let's see with the examples. It's easier to understand that way. So let's assume that you're doing an enzyme activity experiment. You would use some sort of enzyme and measuring method. I'm not talking about those right now. The enzyme activity, the rate of change, the rate of that your measurement is the dependent variable, and the temperature that you're changing is the independent variable. The temperature is not influenced by the enzyme activity. The enzyme activity is influenced by the temperature, and you cannot change directly the enzyme activity, as I told with the previous statements. So this is your independent variable in this experiment, and this is your dependent variable. Let's see the second one. This is temperature in decomposition of calcium carbonate and rate of carbon dioxide produced. So you would have like a gas syringe or some type of measuring volume device. This would be your dependent variable, and the temperature that you're changing in the decomposition of calcium carbonate would be your independent variable. So that let's assume in the third experiment, let's assume that you're measuring cooling experiment, that you're doing a cooling experiment for physics. This heat transfer, the Q, is your dependent variable, and the types of clothes or type of material that you're using would be your independent variable. Let's go back to biology with this example. So starch is like a compound that occurs after photosynthesis. So you would measure starch concentration, and you would find like the photosynthesis rate. So the starch concentration is a dependent variable. So photosynthesis is dependent on the light intensity. You would find that with this experiment. So diameter of the wire and resistance, you would measure resistance, and the diameter of wire is independent variable in this case. This is the dependent variable. Volume of gas, again, similar to this experiment, the amount of catalyst in this time, it would be like if you increase the catalyst, you would increase the volume of gas produced. So they're directly proportional. Let's talk about extraneous and control variables. So extraneous variable is something that can influence both independent and dependent variables, which cannot be controlled. So you wouldn't want these. So you want to limit the outside influence for both your independent and dependent variables. And control variable is almost the same, but you can control them this time. So let's explain with the previous example once. So I stated the independent and dependent variables of these already on the previous part, but let's see if this is control and extraneous variables, how would they change? What are these? Let's learn with the examples. So in the enzyme activity experiment, you would want as your control variable, you would have the concentrations of the substrate. So this would influence your dependent variable, not this independent variable. Your dependent variable that would cause like a radiation in your experiment that would increase the reliability of your experiment. So you wouldn't want this. So you would want to control it. Let's see an extraneous variable. Amount of so every liquid has a different amount of solubility. Like a tap water would have less solubility than a pure sample that is distilled sampled. So you would want to use similar water, like similar type of water, but this is not like limiting the amount of every cup of liquid would have a different amount of solution, so you cannot control this. This is an extraneous that would influence the enzyme activity, since it would like change the amount of substrate dissolved, change the amount of enzyme dissolved in it. So this is an extraneous variable that influences the dependent variable. Let's see, in the second experiment, you would want to, as a control variable, you would want to control your purity of your calcium carbonates. And this would influence a lot of things. So you would want as pure as a sample for your calcium carbonate compound. type in the third experiment, you would want your temperature probe or the thing that you're measuring with like as ideal as possible. You want to use that as ideal as possible. What I'm talking about, you would like see, assuming that you're using a temperature probe, you wouldn't want to like touch the bottom of the cup when you're like measuring it, or you would want to touch it on the thing that is transferring the heat. You wouldn't want it to touch the air. You wouldn't want it to touch anything other than the thing that you're measuring. So this is your control variable. You would say that. But like in the lab, assume that you're doing like cooling experiments, as I told. You cannot control the ambient temperature. Maybe you can, but sometimes you cannot control the ambient temperature. So this would be the extraneous variable for this experiment. In the fourth one, the the photosynthesis experiment, you would want your iodine solution, which is like changes color when is added to starch. Iodine solution concentration or iodine solution purity, you would want these controlled as possible. The diameter, you would give the same amount of volts. You would use the same amount of wire since you're changing the diameter of it. Stuff like this. These are control variables. The amount of catalyst and the volume of gas produced experiment, like in this one, you would want to keep the temperature similar in this case, and but you cannot like control the atmospheric pressure. Or when you're talking about extraneous variables, think of something that you cannot change or you cannot control, something bigger than you, such as it's about the earth, it's about the altitude that you're living in, it's about like the environment that you're in. Those stuff are the extraneous variables. So where would you use these? What are these that I'm talking about? You would need, like in the experiment phase, you would want an independent variable, and depending on the the subject that you're doing it, you would want another independent variable or dependent variable. uh, Control variables are important in writing your IAs, since those are stated in the IA, and it would show that your knowledge on the subject. Extraneous variables are, those are not common in the IAs, but if you're doing like a statistic IA in mathematics, you would want to state your extraneous variable if you have them. Yeah, that's about it. This was the end of the video. Thank you for watching.